Something significant just changed. And the students who don't know about it yet, the ones who are preparing their Italy visa applications right now using last year's information, last year's financial figures, last year's rules, those students are walking directly into a rejection they never saw coming. This isn't a minor administrative tweak. This is a structural shift in how Italy is processing international student visa applications in 2026. The financial thresholds have moved, the documentation standards have tightened. A completely new biometric requirement is now mandatory at consulates globally, and the pre-enrollment system on University has been overhauled with rules that most applicants have never read. If you are planning to study in Italy, if you have an offer letter in hand, if you're budgeting your bank balance, if you're about to book a consulate appointment, stop everything and watch this first. Because the version of this process you think you know is no longer the version that exists. Welcome to John's Global Guide, where we give you the information that actually matters before it costs you everything. Let's start with the number that is shocking the most students right now, the proof of funds requirement. For years, the baseline financial figure attached to the Italian student visa sat in a relatively familiar range. Students knew approximately what was expected, planned accordingly, and showed up to consulates with bank statements reflecting those familiar numbers. That era is over. Italy's Ministry of University and Research has published an official 2-year circular covering academic years 2026-2027 and 2027-2028, setting the minimum subsistence requirement at 10,179 per year, 10,179 euros per year, excluding accommodation costs and return flight tickets. That figure is not a suggestion from a university blog. It comes directly from the interministerial working group involving the Ministry of University and Research, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and the Ministry of the Interior. It is the official number. And if your bank statement does not reflect it, your visa application is in serious trouble before a single officer even reads your personal statement. Now, here is where it gets more layered. Because the $10,179 figure from the MUR circular is not the only number being quoted across consulates right now, and that inconsistency is causing real confusion for applicants. The official Italian visa management framework quantifies subsistence at 534.41 euros per month for each month of the academic year, totaling 6,947.33 annually, which must be proven through personal or parental economic guarantees or recognized scholarships, and critically, cannot be demonstrated through bank guarantees, insurance policies, or cash. What this means practically is that different consulates are applying different thresholds depending on the source document they are referencing. Some are using the MUR circular figure. Others are anchored to the older MIXI framework. This is not a loophole. This is a risk, and the safest strategy, the strategy that does not leave your application exposed to whatever interpretation a particular consulate officer applies on a particular day, is to prepare for the higher number. Students planning to live in expensive cities such as Milan or Rome should expect higher living costs and may need to demonstrate greater financial capacity, while smaller university cities like Bologna, Padova, or Perugia tend to be more affordable. That city-specific reality is now more important than ever. Showing the minimum is no longer enough to feel safe. Showing enough to convincingly cover the cost of life in the city where you actually intend to study, that is the standard consulates are moving toward in 2026. Italian embassies and consulates are scrutinizing bank statements, sponsorship letters, and scholarship documents more carefully than ever before. Financial proof is no longer a formality. It is a critical step in the visa application process. And there is one specific behavior that automated consulate software is now actively scanning for, what authorities are calling fund dumping. Consulates in 2026 are using advanced software to scan uploaded bank statements for irregular patterns, immediately flagging sudden massive cash deposits. If your bank balance jumped dramatically in the weeks before your application, the system flags it. The officer looks closer. Questions get asked that you are not prepared to answer. The safest financial profile for an Italy student visa in a 2026 is a consistent one. Funds that have been sitting stably across at least 3 to 6 months of statements, showing a pattern of financial normalcy rather than a last-minute scramble to hit a threshold. Now let's talk about the second major change, because the financial requirement is the one everyone is focused on. But this next update may actually be the one that derails more applications in 2026 than any other single factor. Biometrics. Mandatory. For everyone. Under Decree Law 145/2024, the mandatory fingerprinting requirement already applied to short-stay Schengen visas, extended to work, study, investment, and family reunification visas from January 11th, 2026. Applicants must appear in person, submit 10 digital fingerprints and a live photo, and the biometric data remains valid for 59 months, eliminating the need for repeat enrollment on subsequent visas. What this means in practical terms is that every student applying for an Italian study visa in 2026 must now attend an in-person consulate appointment for biometric capture, separate from and in addition to the standard application appointment. Consulates report that each appointment now takes 12 to 15 minutes, double the previous processing time, raising concerns about slot availability during peak periods. This is not a minor scheduling inconvenience. In major applicant countries, consulate appointments for Italy are already competitive, adding a mandatory biometric step to the process, during the same period when thousands of students across the same region are applying for the same academic intake. It creates a bottleneck that can push your entire timeline back by weeks. Even after the June 2026 digital document submission rollout, applicants will still be required to book an in-person appointment solely to submit fingerprints. Documents and fees may be submitted electronically beforehand, but the application remains paused until physical biometrics are captured. Plan for this. Build it into your timeline from the first day you begin preparing documents, not as an afterthought, not as a last step, but as a foundational scheduling constraint that everything else has to work around. All student visa applicants are now required to provide biometric information, fingerprints and a photo, at their local Italian visa application center or consulate. Consulates have also tightened their document authenticity verifications, with each document double and triple checked to prevent fraud. This stricter scrutiny requires better prepared and authenticated documents for a study visa. Name mismatches between documents are now a specific red flag. If your name on the passport and other documents differs in any way, you must submit a one and same certificate, attested and apostilled. This sounds like a small detail until your application gets frozen at the consulate because of a spelling variation between your passport and your university admission letter that you never noticed before. Let's move to the third major update, the Universitali pre-enrollment system. All non-EU students requiring a visa must submit a pre-enrollment application, a domanda di prescrizione, via Universitali. For the 2026-2028 biennium, a critical procedural update is the 20% over quota rule. Institutions are now authorized to validate applications up to 120% of their reserved seats for international students. This buffer was introduced specifically because the historical pattern of pre-enrollment showed a consistent gap between the number of students who completed pre-enrollment and the number who actually arrived. Visa denials, withdrawals, and last-minute changes meant universities were consistently under-enrolled relative to their validated applicant pool. The 20% buffer attempts to correct for that. But here's the consequence that most students are not thinking about. Because universities now know they can validate up to 120% of their available seats, the validation process has become more selective, not less. There are more applicants than ever, and each institution is now making calculated decisions about which applicants to validate first, based on academic record, document completeness, and how closely the applicant profile matches the program criteria. If a visa or enrollment is denied, that slot reopens immediately, and a monitoring alert pauses further validations once the ceiling is reached. This is a live, dynamic system, which means if you're late, if your documents are incomplete, if your application has errors in the Universitali portal, you may find that your slot was already reallocated before anyone told you there was a problem. Requests filled with mistakes on the Universitali website can delay or invalidate your application. Common errors include selecting the wrong academic year, selecting a different university or course from the one on your offer letter, and missing the verification status. When the portal shows the status non-immatricolato, your application is effectively invalid. These mistakes sound obvious until you're navigating a government portal in a second language under deadline pressure, juggling 4 other documents simultaneously. The margin for error in 2026 is thinner than it has ever been, and the consequences of that margin, a wasted pre-enrollment, a missed visa window, an entire academic year lost, are not recoverable on a short timeline. For the 2026 intake, the Italian government has confirmed that pre-enrollment via Universitali is mandatory for all international students, and missing either the portal requirement or the minimum bank balance will result in visa refusal. Most rejections are due to insufficient funds or incomplete universally pre-enrollment. Read that sentence carefully. Most rejections. Not some. Most. And both causes are entirely preventable with preparation, which means most of the students who get rejected in 2026 will be rejected for reasons that were within their control, on a timeline that gave them enough time to act, if they had known. Now let's talk about documentation scrutiny, because the standards around what constitutes an acceptable document have also shifted in ways that are catching students off guard. In 2026, Italian consulates are applying more rigorous checks on each submission. New stricter guidelines may require certified translations of academic transcripts and more detailed financial statements from a recognized bank. Starting document preparation at least 3 to 4 months before your intended enrollment date is strongly recommended, as missing even one document can result in significant processing delays. The phrase certified translation is doing a lot of work in that sentence. Many students assume that a translated document is a certified document. They are not the same thing. A certified translation in the Italian consulate context means a sworn translation by a qualified, recognized translator. And in some cases, depending on your country of origin and the specific consulate you are applying through, it means a legalized or apostilled translation. If you hand in a document that required certification and what you submitted was only translated, that document is invalid for visa purposes. Your application pauses. Your timeline collapses. The Italian government has placed greater emphasis on financial documentation, health insurance coverage, and university enrollment proof. Students who are already familiar with the previous visa process will notice notable differences, particularly around processing timelines and required supporting documents. Health insurance is now scrutinized with the same rigor as financial documents. Coverage must be comprehensive. Enrollment in Italy's national healthcare system can only be done after arriving in Italy, so it cannot be used as adequate proof of health insurance in a visa application. Students must possess adequate insurance that covers medical expenses and hospital stays. Arrive with a policy that is active from the day you land, covers the full duration of your stay, and is documented in a format the consulate recognizes. Do not assume a basic travel insurance policy is sufficient. It is not. And there is one final update that affects every student, regardless of the city, regardless of the university, regardless of the program. Students must apply for their residence permit, the permesso di soggiorno, at Poste Italiane within 8 working days of arriving in Italy. The permit requires your passport, visa, and university enrollment documentation, followed by a biometrics appointment at the local questura. 8 working days, not 8 calendar days, 8 business days from the moment you land. Students who arrive in Italy, spend a few days settling in, and assume they have several weeks before this step becomes urgent, are making a miscalculation that can complicate their legal status before their first semester even begins. This is what the Italy student visa process looks like in June 2026. It is more thorough, more technically demanding, and more unforgiving of administrative errors than it was in any previous year. But here's the truth that sits underneath all of this complexity. Italy remains one of the most remarkable study destinations in the world. The universities, Bologna, Bocconi, Politecnico di Milano, La Sapienza, Padova, operate at a standard that competes with the best institutions in Europe. The cultural environment is irreplaceable. The post-study opportunity is real. The cost, even with updated financial thresholds, remains significantly lower than the UK, the US, Australia, or Canada at comparable academic quality levels. The rules have changed, the bar has moved, but the opportunity on the other side of that process is still exactly what drew you toward Italy in the first place. The question now is whether your preparation is as serious as the process demands. Because in 2026, Italy is not making it easier to arrive unprepared. And the consulate officer reviewing your application in the weeks ahead will not make exceptions for students who simply didn't know. The ones who knew and acted on it early are the ones who get through. Whether you are in that group is entirely decided before you ever walk through those consulate doors.